from the flagless poles at the Plaza of Nations at Expo 86. Misha and Dianne are watching week 98 of Santa Barbara.
Hello.
Yes, it's week 98. And we have watched episode 475, which originally aired Monday, June 9th, 1986. Last night we watched a Mission Impossible, and Henry Darrow was in it. So we saw him like 2 days in a row. Julia quits as David's attorney, and the reporters interview Sheila, and she confirms she had an affair with David. He leaps up and shouts at the reporters that she's lost her mind and has probably been paid to write that letter. Now, Mason seems to think that's put him in a bad light, but I don't know. I think it's probably reasonable. Wasn't too crazy. He says to David, the next time you're on trial for murder, I'd advise you to use a little more discretion. Julia tells Mason she's thinking of resigning as David's lawyer. So she's kind of backpedaled a little from having just quit. He tells her, that's a great idea. And we'll get him nice and convicted, and that'll be done. And she says, well, you should never try to push me in the direction that you want. And she says she's now leaning towards staying as his opponent. And he says, well, I always did hate winning battles by default. You'd never forgive yourself if you threw in the towel. So I think he was actually trying to do that on purpose then, to try and get her back.
And we actually see throughout the whole episode Julia going back and forth about whether to remain David's lawyer or not. And we see her having a lot of little conversations about it throughout the episode.
I guess it would look bad to Mason if he won after the lawyer quit. So Augusta finds Julia crying, and Julia basically says she probably should keep defending David or the jury will find him guilty. Julia asks Courtney why she didn't warn her about this Sheila thing. And Courtney says she was worried that Julia would have Sheila smuggled out of town before she could even testify. Then Julia questions Lionel about his interactions with Madeline, and Lionel explains that he was working with Grant Capwell to get back everything Cece stole, including the house. So this is interesting. I'd like to see how that's going to work out. David returns all his files to Julia, and he asks her to tell him that she believes he's innocent, but she does not answer. So he walks out and walks into the courtroom and tells the judge he's defending himself, but just as he is, Julia walks in and agrees to still continue being his judge, being his attorney. It's now time for Julia to cross-examine Sheila, and she does so. She gets Sheila to admit that she hated Madeline. And then Julia throws in, enough to kill her, which is, of course, completely inappropriate. And Mason objects, and the judge not only agrees, but admonishes Julia for trying to throw something like that in. I'm wondering if at the last minute Julia thought, well, I can avoid calling Lionel if I put up a different suspect.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's possible.
Yeah. Mason rests his case. Julia tells David that the only way that she can keep being his lawyer is if they agree to just cool it on the relationship. He does not agree and kisses her.
And I always find, the way he disagrees, he says something like, no, because this is what you want. Now, it sort of reminded me a little bit of Dylan, trying to insist that Kelly actually had different thoughts than what she was very sincerely expressing to him. Now, in this case, Julia does actually seem to want to be with David, but just it's kind of obnoxious, I think, when they do that. It's not really endearing at all.
Pearl tells Justin that he didn't know Kelly very well, but they did used to chat when he ferried her back and forth from the casino. But he says Dr. Rawlings treated someone he was very close to, and he doesn't want to talk about it. So basically, Pearl and Justin are, I guess, going to hatch a plan to get Pearl into the nut house.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspect when Dr. Rawlings realizes who Pearl is, he might pull something similar to what he did with Justin earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Pearl confronts Sheila at the Orient Express about her performance on the stand, and she asks about his performance as a Damon Runyon character. Isn't that nasty little business with your brother? Pearl tells Courtney he may have to leave her and everything else because his past has been catching up lately. So that's a bit of a shocking revelation. I'm not sure if he's just saying that because he may be in the mental institution for a while and that's what he's talking about, or that he may have to leave town after he tries to spy on Kelly. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually had a little bit of a sense of foreboding when he said that, because I took it to mean that he was using this to cover his stay in the mental institution. And that means there's going to be one less person looking for him when he's gone and doesn't come back. And I think that's going to make him a lot more vulnerable to Dr. Rawlings.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also of the opinion that what we saw with Justin and Dr. Rawlings, and I think we talked about this before, how it seemed really, really quite sinister that, when Dr. Rawlings said, "Oh, we're going to take you away," and then he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like maybe that was foreshadowing to what might actually happen to Pearl.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm thinking. Now, other than the general sense I had that Damon Runyon was probably a playwright or a writer, didn't really know anything about him, so I thought it was worth looking up. For those of you who are also unfamiliar, Damon Runyon, 1880 to 1946, was an American newspaperman and short story writer. This is all courtesy of Wikipedia, of course. And known for characters representing a distinctive social type from Brooklyn or Midtown Manhattan, writing tales of gamblers, hustlers, actors, and gangsters who go by colorful nicknames, hence the Pearl. Elements from his stories were used for the musical Guys and Dolls, which may be something that's people would be more familiar with if they haven't read his short stories.
I was not familiar with the name. I think I've heard it somewhere, but I just assumed it meant some old-timey character writer, which I guess is what it was.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've only ever heard the phrase Damon Runyon character. I've never heard his name outside of that context, so I kind of had the general sense of it from that. Probably the first time I heard it was when Sheila said it in 1986, and now again. So Cruz is no longer in a sling, so I guess he's healed. I didn't really take a look at his face to see if that's healed, but presumably in prison, Kirk is also no longer suffering from his injuries. While watching the trial on TV, Santana says the chief thought Sheila and David were having an affair the whole time. And then Cruz says, "Well, I thought the letter was a fake the whole time." Cruz tries to get Keith to agree to investigate Sheila Carlisle a bit, but Keith says the investigation is over. Cruz says he doesn't take orders from Keith. Cruz tries to get Mason to investigate Sheila more, or at least question her more thoroughly, but Mason says it's too late. This is just before he wraps up his case, and so he does not delve into her. So Cruz tells Julia that he has his suspicions and will investigate Sheila Carlisle on his own. I don't know if this will get him in trouble with the police, but be interesting to see what he discovers.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how he handles whatever evidence he has, because he is doing it now outside of the official DA's investigations.
Mm-hmm. So he'll have to make sure whatever he has is usable in court if he finds something worth mentioning.
But I think from Julia's perspective, if she doesn't want to use Lionel, I think this is really the best way for her to get David off, is to prove that letter is a fake and to really more solidly set up Julia as a potential, Sheila as a potential alternate suspect.
Mm-hmm. That way she can keep Lionel and Augusta happy, I think. I'm about to talk about Keith and Cruz and Santana, and they actually mentioned that Keith just barely won an election, which is very interesting, because I was under the impression that in the U.S. all the elections kind of happen at the same time, the beginning of November during those election years, and it's mid-June, and Tony Patterson kind of just made it seem like he was retiring, not that he had lost an election to Keith Timmins. If the election was in November of 1984, that was quite a while back. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Normally, you could have an election if there's got to be if someone dies and you've got to replace him. The only other thing I can think of is that maybe Tony Patterson announced he was retiring because of his health issues, and they did have an election. Mm-hmm. And Tony wasn't actually running against Keith. Keith and whoever were running to fill Tony's seat. I guess that makes sense. Anyway, Keith asked Cruz to act as a liaison between the DA's office and the Latino community. Cruz says it sounds like he just wants to make points with all those people who didn't vote for him in the last election, because I guess he did not do well with the Latino vote. Santana and Cruz argue about Keith's motives, and she thinks Cruz is just jealous. At the Orient Express, Santana tells Keith she'd like to volunteer on his community project. And he gets her to stay for lunch while he's there. Later, Cruz mentions that he saw them laughing together in the hallways after lunch. She says he's jealous. That's twice she's called him jealous in the same episode. And she says, I put up with Eden for months. Cruz says, is this about getting even? And Santana says, no, Keith is a friend of mine, and I'm going to see him no matter what you say. I'm kind of excited about this Santana-Keith thing. I think it might be a great match. She's obviously wanted Cruz since high school, but this clearly is not what she had envisioned, so she should just cut it loose.
Yeah, I think basically Cruz and Eden are irritating each other out of a marriage. They don't even seem...
Santana and Cruz.
Santana. Yeah, so I think that they're basically just irritating each other through to the end of their marriage.
Lionel and Augusta sneak into their old house. He says he's going to jail anyway when he refuses to testify. They have Chinese food on a blanket in front of the fire. And Augusta says, nights like this make me think that I've sort of missed being married to you. So, hopefully, whatever Lionel is forced to testify about won't turn her mind around on that. And we had credits in this episode. We have Keith Timmins, Justin Dees is now in the credits. Dylan and Kirk are still in the credits. Dr. Rawlings, Ben Piazza is now in the main credits. And Alice, Marie Alice Rakasner, and Jane Wilson, Jane Sibbett. And in the second section of the credits, Sheila Terry Trees, reporter Jenny Blacken, and Judge Jack Heller. All right, we'll be back after we watch episode 476. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
How's Warren doing? Robbed any ferry boats lately?
Welcome back. We've watched episode 476 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Tuesday, June 10th, 1986. But before watching it, we watched episode 9 of Friends, in which Jane Sibbett takes over the role of Carol, so we'll be seeing her on both shows. Keith asks Santana about the man Cruz is meeting with at the Orient Express, and it's Juan Montoya from the Latin Council. Keith manages to go over there and try to get in there by saying, oh, I understand you want more patrolmen on the beat. And Montoya says we want more bilingual patrolmen. Mm-hmm. And then when Cruz gets called away by Cece, Keith sits down with Montoya and starts to have the conversation in Spanish. Mm-hmm. It's a nice little character thing for Keith. And then he later tells Santana he's going to be giving a speech to the Latin Council next week. So Cruz will be a bit pissed off by that.
I think so.
And Santana gives him the good news. He's getting full custody of Brandon today. She's getting full custody of Brandon today.
They are getting full custody of Brandon.
She and her husband Cruz, who are happily married. Lionel wakes up in his old house to find Augusta gone, and Cece at the door with Tony the guard to arrest him for trespassing. Cece says, "How's Warren? Robbed any ferry boats lately?" Cruz is called in and says, "We're really kind of busy to deal with this kind of thing here." And Lionel says he's going to get everything back, including the house. And Cece finds that so amusing, he tells Cruz not to bother arresting him. And Cruz says, "Sooner or later, this is going to get out of hand." And Cece says, "I already took everything from him. How was he going to top that?" Which I would really like to see. Cece, however, sends a spy to follow Lionel, and at the Orient Express, he tries to hear what Lionel's saying to Brick. And Lionel's trying to enlist Brick's aid, but he says to Brick, you can back out if you don't want to, but I want you to go talk to Grant Capwell in Boston, and if you agree, he'll lay out the plan. So that's kind of exciting that Lionel's wanting to do more stuff with Brick. But I'm really hoping that we actually see Grant Capwell instead of all this tease. Would hate for Grant to, or for Brick to come back next episode and say, "Well, I saw Grant." What I would do is I would have Lionel on the stand, about to be sent to jail for contempt of court for not answering any questions about this so-called deal with Madeline and Grant, and then at the end of the episode, Brick bursts in, followed by Grant Capwell.
Which would be a little bit like the introduction that we got to Alexis Carrington on Dynasty, with the big lead up, and then at the end her bursting into the courtroom, and of course she had her veil on, so we didn't actually get to see her until the next season.
I'm sure if Grant shows up, we'll see him.
I'm sure he won't be in a veil.
Later, Cece tries to get Brick to tell him what Lionel is up to, but Brick says, "Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you." And Cece says, "Brick, you're not my enemy yet." So I like that Cece appears to be trying to, be friendly with Brick too.
I think he has respect for Brick's business skills. It was nice to see Brick again. It was really nice to see how his relationship with his two families have actually progressed. He talked about Lionel as his dad throughout this episode. And he also identified his brothers, not just Warren, but also Ted.
Cece does say, "Every time I see you, I think of my wife's betrayal," but really Brick has, nothing to do with that. Can't really put that on him. Back at the state hospital, Kelly tries to help Alice eat, but the nurse comes in and says she missed breakfast, was over 10 minutes ago, and tries to take the tray away, which Kelly objects to. Rawlings comes in and decides Kelly's a bit too feisty. She probably hasn't been taking her pills, and from now on she'll be getting her drugs by injection, which really traumatizes Alice, and she ends up knocking the tray at the nurse. So that's the first reaction we've seen from Alice. So maybe she'll come out of her, probably self-imposed muteness and start to talk with Kelly when they're alone together. Eden tries to visit, but Rawlings threatens to have her banned. So Eden asks Keith to do something, but he says it's more of a medical than a legal issue. Now this is at the Orient Express, and he's at the table with Cruz and Eden. And Keith also points out that very soon Kelly is going to be on the opposite side of him in a trial, and he kind of smirks when he sees how annoyed Cruz is. So I kind of like that he's now needling the Capwell just because he doesn't like Cruz. Eden goes back and says, "I'm going to try to talk to Rawlings again." But Cruz shows up with a court order, but reveals to Eden, they have a whole bunch in a drawer. I just typed one up. Hopefully he won't look at it too closely. So Eden gets a few minutes with Kelly. Kelly's pretty much a zombie, but she has difficulty recognizing Eden, but then does. And when Eden tries to bring up the rest of the family, Kelly says, "Oh, they never visit." And Eden says, "Well, they're not allowed to." And she said, Are they giving you drugs?" And then Kelly says, "I want to go home." And then Rawlings says, "Okay, that's enough. That's enough. Let's wrap this up." So maybe he doesn't want the family to know how drugged up Kelly is.
Yeah, and Eden is not impressed with Rollins at all, and she's not having it from him. And it's really interesting how Rollins has really rubbed so many people the wrong way in different ways. Justin, of course. Pearl knows him apparently from way back and is plotting against him now. Eden is not impressed with him. And I don't think Cruz is too happy with him either. So he's just really, really rubbing everyone the wrong way. And he's still got Cece convinced that he is giving Kelly the right therapy. But I don't actually think Cece's that fond of him either. So
yeah, because when Eden complained to Cece, he goes, okay, I'll check into it. But then something else happens and he doesn't end up checking into it. But he already did that in the last episode. So what more can he do,
Yeah.
Gina visits Haley at the radio station. And Brandon is in the booth with Ted, so that was a nice little surprise. And Brandon gives Gina one of Rosa's chocolate chip cookies, which are very tasty. Jane gives Gina some copy to hand over to Haley, and Gina browses through it, and it's about how popular chocolate chip cookie shops are now in the U.S., and they're popping up all over. And Gina seems to have an idea.
And Gina, this actually reminded me of a few years ago when there were cupcake shops all over our city anyway.
Gina is worried when she overhears that Santana is meeting with Cece today. So she shows up just as Cece is about to hand over the permanent custody document. And she manages to talk Cece into giving her 5 minutes alone before handing it over. And shows him the videotape and says, I want to see this. And it'll change everything. But he says, it's too late. These were drawn up 6 months ago. I'm only handing them over now. And so Gina leaves without showing him the tape, but telling him that he'll be sorry he didn't go for the deal.
And you know what? I have a feeling she's right.
And we were wondering what's Gina going to do between now and the time she uses the tape. Well, now she's got her cookie thing to keep, for a subplot. And another one that we will see at the end of this. She also takes the opportunity to tell off Santana and Cruz for trying to pass off their loveless marriage as a stable home for Brandon. Gina tries to reconcile with Haley, and she does this in the Luckridge house. So maybe that is where Gina's been staying.
Maybe.
And maybe she had to hide upstairs while Lionel and Augusta were downstairs last night. But Haley says that everything Gina does is a scheme, and even, as Haley is complaining to her about this, Gina's trying to scheme about how to get Brandon, how to make Santana look bad, Oh, maybe I can break up her and Cruz, or maybe Eden will do it for me. But Keith may be the one who does it, because Keith wants to take Santana out to dinner to celebrate. And Cruz arrives to do the same, and Santana says, Keith has invited me to join him. Do you mind a threesome? This really does not go over well with Cruz. He goes, I should just get back to work. So, Gina overhears Keith invite Santana for a walk on the beach after dinner, and Gina breaks into the beach house to steal Rosa's chocolate chip cookie recipe, which she does, but also, as a bonus, witnesses Keith kissing Santana.
And we kind of see, it's actually quite a funny scene, we kind of see Gina sneaking along under the window and popping up every once in a while.
Yes, I can say the cookie storyline is definitely going to be a comedic storyline for Gina, which I think Robin Mattson is really suited for. Maybe more so than Linda Gibney's Gina would have been. And now we're about to meet a new cast member. Haley calls into Ted's show, even though she's just in the lobby, to request a song to dedicate to her boyfriend, which Ted's kind of giggly about doing. He agrees to play it, but he takes another call, and a very sexy caller diverts his attention. And we just see this woman's hands, and she's got very long purple fingernails, and she's wearing a silk negligee, it looks like. And she makes all of these semi-suggestive yet musical references to Ted to play something for her. And in the end, Haley's very annoyed after he hangs up. He ends up playing the Mystery Callers record instead of Haley's.
And I had actually initially assumed this was Jane, trying to trip Ted up in some way. But as you say,
I had that thought too, yeah.
She has the long sort of fingernails, so Jane would have had to, I think, put that on. I mean, it's. Yeah, I mean,
I'm looking at this screenshot. She had like a yellow phone, so Jane was at the office. I don't, unless there's another office in the back with it, the kind of phone you'd have at home. That doesn't look like a phone that would be in the office. So, but I had thought that too, that she's trying to play a trick on Ted. But, we do not know the name of this color, but I happen to remember it. So this will not be the last time we hear the sexy caller. And I suspect this is maybe also a callback to some kind of movie or something that I'm not quite familiar with.
I was originally, what it reminded me of was a movie that you and I actually watched after Jessica Walter passed away, which is called Play Misty for Me, which is one that she was in. And of course, it's I think it's Clint Eastwood's first movie as a director. And if that's the case, we may even have a stalking storyline to look forward to.
Oh, well. Santa Barbara Summertime Teen Theme Fun Time could have stalking in it. Last year's was much worse than that. So we'll see as the new character gets introduced. And we have another, I want to say teen on the scene, but I guess these people are now, approaching their 20s. And we will, according to my notes, there's going to be a nice, interesting development in the next episode. So we will be back after we watch episode 477. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
For that matter, I'm starving right now. You want to have lunch?
Oh, I'd love to. Keith has invited me to join him. Would you mind a threesome?
From the remnants of the Plaza of Nations at Expo 86, we're watching Santa Barbara.
I checked out this Dr. Rawlings. He's a first-rate psychiatrist.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 477 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Wednesday, June 11th, 1986. Rawlings realizes that the court order is a phony and kicks Cruz and Eden out of the hospital. Keith tells Cece that Eden snuck in to see Kelly. He says, I checked out this Dr. Rawlings. He's a first-rate psychiatrist. So everyone seems to get the same result when they check him out. Cece actually says again in this episode, I'll check into it, which is already done.
Now, I'm assuming they're talking to people. This wouldn't be like nowadays where someone could put up a fake website with fake testimonials. So it would be interesting to know how he's looking into it.
I mean, if the people he used to work with are giving him a good result, then whatever happened to Pearl and or his brother obviously didn't get publicized in a negative way, or they're really all covering for Dr. Rawlings. Keith admonishes Cruz for using fake documents. He says, they weren't fake. I just didn't sign them. Pearl tells Cruz he's had past experience with this Dr. Rawlings, and maybe I could break into Rawlings' office. So Cruz is definitely against that. He says he's already on thin ice. But then Pearl talks to Eden, and she is game, not only to break in, but to go with him. So they break into the file room, it looks like. I don't think they actually even got a drawer open before Rawlings stumbled in and found glass all over the floor, and they actually escaped out the other door, and I don't think anyone spotted them, although one wonders if there are cameras around.
Yeah, I was actually a little surprised to see Eden was such a big part of this caper. It actually almost reminded me a little bit of some of the adventures she was going on with Cruz. So, I guess
Pearl will be a new pairing.
I mean, it shows Eden's adventurous side.
Well, she did parachute into the show in her first episode.
Exactly, we're kind of getting back to that side of her a little bit.
Yeah. I really, unless Pearl says, I managed to slip this file out during the commotion, I think there's going to have to be a subsequent attempt.
And again, remember, this is before they had even flash keys, so it's not like he just pocketed some, digital file.
Yeah, there's no way. I don't think they even opened a cabinet, let alone had time to search for a piece of paper. Cruz tells Santana that he was helping Eden to see Kelly, not really for Eden, but because Joe Perkins was his best friend. So it was nice to have a reference to Joe. Santana's already kind of checked out on why Cruz is going to see Eden. Brick agrees to meet with Grant Capwell, and maybe the writers realized it would be much easier if Grant were in Santa Barbara, because guess what? He happens to be in Santa Barbara. And he is played by John Considine, whose brother Tim we've been watching on 1950s Mickey Mouse Club Hardy Boys mysteries.
Yeah, and he's also known for the Shaggy Dog, and for being in the first, I guess, 4 or 5 seasons of My Three Sons, when it was still in black and white.
And I, of course, know John Considine best as his character on Another World, whose name I can't remember at the moment. So that's kind of funny. Harrison? I don't know. We'll dub that in. Reginald Love. Grant tells Brick that years ago he and Cece were both dating Pamela. So here's an interesting new little twist. And it's been almost 2 years since the show premiered, and we've been teased with Pamela for that long, and we still haven't seen her. And lo and behold, someone made it look like Grant had embezzled $1 million from his father's company. And as a result, Grant was disinherited, and Cece inherited everything, including the share that would have gone to Grant. So this is a really simple turn of events, but it gives an amazing, huge backstory for this whole thing, and explains why Grant would even help Lionel with anything. So I thought this was a really well-constructed thing, and to pull Pamela in, I think was a good idea, too.
I thought that it also opened the doors to some other possibilities. For example, was Grant involved in whatever scheme Pamela and Mason were working on when Channing was killed?
And I have no memory of whether or not that's brought up again, although they did remind us of it a few weeks ago. So I feel like maybe they have something planned for that when they finally do introduce Pamela.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what Mason's relationship is like with Grant, since Grant was close to Pamela.
Yeah, that might be an interesting team up.
The other thing the introduction of this character reminded me of, I feel like he even looks a little bit like the brother of, oh gosh, I can't even remember his name.
Blake Carrington?
Blake Carrington, that's it, on
Ben
Dynasty.
His brother Ben?
Yeah.
So Grant's plans to get his half of Capwell Enterprises back, and he's agreed to give Lionel back everything that Cece took from him. In exchange for something, and this is the interesting bit. Lionel knows who embezzled the $1 million, and he has documents. Now, Grant says, I hope I'm going to get revenge against my brother, and I'm going to get revenge against the person who set me up, and I hope they're the same person. So it shows that Lionel has not revealed his cards, and maybe that was the nature of the argument with Madeline. Maybe Madeline said, we want the name before we'll, sign anything. And maybe it's not Cece. Maybe it's Pamela. And Lionel knows it would be better, for him to get everything signed before they find out it's not Cece, because that will make the revenge maybe not quite what Grant is hoping for. But either way, whether it was Pamela or Cece or some other person, maybe Augusta's parents were involved. It seems like half the assets should be Grant's anyway. So it's not really a revenge thing. It's more like getting what he's due. So the revenge part will be against the person who set him up. It doesn't make sense that, Pamela would do it if, she's, there's two guys interested in her. You wouldn't set up one of them. It would make more sense for the other guy to do it. So Grant is hoping it will be Cece. Maybe that's what those papers are that we saw Lionel taking out of that secret cubbyhole a few weeks ago. So excited to see some more Capwells. He does mention, he does throw in, just for those wondering, that he had made himself a wealthy man without that inheritance. So that's why the East Coast Capwells are still wealthy.
It'll be interesting to see his relationship with Courtney, too, who, of course, is his other daughter.
Yeah. I guess it's interesting that these family members like to come to Santa Barbara and not tell anyone they know that they're there because of, how David was back and forth, and possibly Madeline was meeting with Lionel even before she and Courtney officially came, Keith kisses Santana as Gina spies on them. And Gina's happy to have something against Santana. Keith swings by the courthouse to tell everyone he's got a busy schedule, but he'll monitor everything from the TV coverage. I'm thinking, is he just really busy, or is he going to spend his whole day trying to hang out with Santana? So we're getting a little bit of insights into Keith Timmons. Gina starts baking cookies, presumably in the Lockridge kitchen, based on Rosa's recipe. And she passes out samples at the courthouse. She's got a little motherly-looking outfit on and a little basket, and she's handing them to extras and main cast members alike.
And everyone says, "Oh, these taste just like Rosa's cookies."
Yeah, Mason says that. She tells Mason she's figured out the name for her new company, Mrs. Capwell's Cookies. Mason says that she might get sued by someone over that name, and he would be willing to represent them. She says, "I'm Mrs. Capwell." So I think that might be an interesting, definitely Cece will sue her, but I think she has a leg to stand on with the name. It's the stolen recipe that might be her downfall.
I think you're right, actually. In fact, I seem to remember there was a court case around this time, or maybe a little before, that was between Vidal Sassoon and his ex-wife over the name Sassoon. So I think these things have come up in the past.
Interesting. Gina asks Mason what he knows about the new DA. And Mason replies, "He's single, if that's what you're getting at." And she says, "No, I'm not trying to date the new DA. But I know something that some people might be interested in." Eden shows up and refuses to take a cookie. But Gina says, it sure would be great if you and Cruz got back together again. Eden says, "Why, so you could get your hands on Brandon?" She says, "Oh, that hadn't even occurred to me." Pearl testifies about his breaking the code on Madeline's date book and identifying Lionel Lockridge as the man that Madeline was seeing in the cabin, the bungalow. On the stand, Lionel admits that he was meeting Madeline to discuss a business merger, but he can't go into details because it would wreck the deal, which is still underway. Now, Cece has gotten wind of Lionel's testimony and is very suspicious and is actually in the courtroom. He's scowling every time we see him, but I don't know if he's putting something together that maybe Grant and Lionel are involved, but the fact is, there's no way Cece could know what it's about, really, because we're talking about stuff that happened so long ago. Actually, we don't quite know when Cece's parents died, actually, but or Dad died, I guess. But I can't imagine, if he is the embezzler, that he would have any inkling that Lionel would know, because after all these years, Lionel's never used it. Julia asks him where he was when Madeline was murdered, because he said he left the bungalow 25 minutes before the time they said. And Lionel says, "We were not having an affair, and I did not kill her." And Augusta jumps up and says, "He was with me," which of course causes all manner of objections, but Lionel later thanks her for lying for him. So I guess he's willing to go with that story, as well as, I was in my car driving back home.
Yeah, and I was really struck during this part of the episode that for all Julia's reassurances that she wouldn't wreck things with Lionel and she wouldn't drag him through the mud, she actually tried very hard to implicate him in the murder. And I think this is really going to wreck things between her and Augusta. And in fact, Augusta basically tells her that at the end of the episode. So,
Augusta says, "I'm glad I ruined your plan to
yeah.
sully Lionel's name." But the way she does it isn't with evidence or anything. It's the same way when Sheila was on the stand. She just suddenly says, "Did you kill Madeline?"
Yeah, it's not
just to get that
particularly
into
clever.
the head of the jury.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I'm assuming, especially with the potential for Pearl's storyline to be taking him into the mental institution, that she won't have Pearl to use. Now she could hack away at Augusta's alibi for Lionel, but that's really going to trash her relationship with them, and I don't see Augusta wavering from that unless some other evidence comes up.
And it's not like Lionel's on trial. And the judge even says, "Mr. Lockridge, you're not on trial. You don't need to answer
several times.
either of these questions about the affair or the..."
In fact, the judge is quite annoyed by it all. So I think Julia's best bet is really to try and pin it on Sheila somehow.
Julia does mention, I think, to David that Nick is looking into Sheila right now. So kind of wondering what Nick's storyline will be, since he's not allowed to see Kelly. He's in the same boat as Janice. He doesn't have a story. Eden asks Keith if he's going to arrest her for the earlier shenanigans, and he says no. And then he adds, "If you're thinking of taking Cruz away from Santana, I wish you'd do it as quickly as you can." So that's kind of fun. Definitely interested in Santana, which I think we all knew. And he's just going to try and short-circuit any of this namby-pamby and just tell Eden, "Why don't you and Cruz get back together? I can be with Santana." I'm sure Cece would be happy if the DA was Brandon's stepfather. That wouldn't squirrel the deal, or whatever the phrase is. Yeah. So anyway, really enjoying Keith Timmons as a new character.
Yeah, he's a lot more fun than the last DA.
And that is it for the Wednesday episode. We'll be back after we watch episode 478 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Try it, they're great.
You know how I feel about anything you give me to eat, Gina. That one bad experience too many.
Oh, Mason, you carry a grudge much too far. I've been handing out freshly baked cookies all over the place. You think I'm trying to commit mass murder?
Very good. Not like roses.
Don't you dare try to use my family name to sell your greasy little cookies, or I'll have you back in there for misrepresentation, you understand?
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 478 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Thursday, June 12th, 1986. And I forgot to mention this. I'll note that Remington Steele was definitely canceled by NBC after the finale. And so I don't know if I'm the only one who's thinking this, but Pierce Brosnan might make for a good James Bond if Roger Moore ever leaves the role.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. He's been doing it for a long time. Last time I forgot to mention that we did have the full cast credits. Everything else was the same. The only thing in the guest cast, we had Jack Heller once again as the judge, and for the first time, John Considine as Grant Capwell. So that's interesting that he is a guest cast. At least at this point, it doesn't look like Grant Capwell is a permanent cast member. So, I don't know. They got someone, I think John Considine was well known even then. So, it seems like a waste to have him only on in, so far, one episode, because he's not in the one we watched today.
I wonder if perhaps there was some kind of contract negotiations taking place, or maybe the same kind of situation we saw. I don't know the history, but with the actor who played Stefano DiMera, and how he only appeared for a short story arc.
Mary is pregnant. I didn't actually see that coming.
No. So whose baby is it?
Uh-oh. Who's the daddy? Mark tells her that he's going back to the Caribbean. I'd somehow kind of forgotten that he was in the Caribbean, but I guess it makes sense because Janice knew him and And Dylan was in the Caribbean, or at least pretending to be. I don't know. Anyway, Mark's, I guess, going back to the Caribbean. Of course, if he finds out Mary's pregnant, that might change his mind, but we'll see if he leaves town in time.
Yeah, he didn't seem to be in a hurry to leave this episode.
No. Cece finds out that Mark is moving out of the guest house for the first time. And Mary tells him that she's marrying Mason. And Mary then tells Mason at the courthouse that Cece welcomed her to the family. And Mason says, that's more than he ever did for me. And then Mark shows up at the courthouse, which surprises Mary, because she was quite sure he was on his way out of town. Julia wants to go over David's testimony before he goes up there. I mean, I think that's a reasonable thing for a defense attorney to do when you're on trial for murder. He declines, though. He says he wants to wing it, I guess. And instead of keeping his answers to the bare minimum, as he is recommended to by Julia and the judge, he states that he never really loved Madeline and basically hated her. She said she had found someone else who could be of use and wanted a divorce quickly because the family was about to double or triple its wealth in the near future. He says that he showed up that day at the bungalow to sign the divorce papers. And when he found Madeline there, he, was freaked out that they might think he, had done it, and that's why he didn't tell anyone. And then he says, I destroyed Madeline by not loving her for all of those years. Mason can't really contain his glee at this wonderful testimony by the accused. Julia has got her head in her hands the whole time. When Mason gets a chance to cross-examine, I guess, David, I think by then it's pretty obvious that because his statement was so heartfelt that the jury just might be buying it. So Mason decides to focus in on one particular thing in case somehow the jury ends up on David's side. And he says, well, you really should have noticed that Madeline was still alive and called for help. So at the very least, you're guilty of negligent manslaughter. So he's trying to pivot his case now towards a lesser, but equally, bad result for David. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out quite what's going on with the trial. One thing I was trying to remember, and then I forgot, so I didn't look it up. But it did cross my mind. There's an old, I think it's an Agatha Christie play called Witness for the Prosecution, where a wife testifies against her husband, but it's all part of a plot to get him off. And once the whole thing unravels, he can't be actually held accountable for a murder that he, in fact, actually committed with the wife. And I cannot remember all the mechanisms that went into play, but I'm trying. I almost think there's perhaps something like that going on with David and Sheila.
It's very weird. It's very hard to figure out because you never believe anything David says.
No. So I'm going to have to look that up just to see if any of it fits.
Gina tries to get Sophia to invest in her new cookie company. And after being turned down, she says, I'm going to visit Kelly soon. Which Sophia finds a little bit, odd. Then Gina enlists Brandon to take some promotional photos of her holding trays of cookies. Haley arrives and takes over the photography because Brandon sucks at it. Gina sings them a bit of a jingle that she's come up with. Mommies and daddies, copies and crookies all love Mrs. Capwell's cookies. When Haley complains about the terrible rhyme, Gina changes crookies to bookies. And then she tries to get Haley to invest the last $3,000 she inherited from her dad in the up-and-coming Mrs. Capwell's cookie business. Takes a few scenes, but Gina manages to get Haley to agree as an investment only and not as a forgiveness or anything else. She will give Gina the $3,000 for her business.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So this is all on Haley when she loses all her money.
Mm-hmm. Cece encounters Gina giving out cookies at the courthouse. Says, "Don't you dare use my family name to sell your greasy little cookies." Rosa takes Brandon to lunch, and he gives her a cookie. "I know a lady who makes these," he says. And as soon as Rosa tastes it, she knows immediately this is her own cookie recipe. So I don't know how long Mrs. Cabwell's cookies are going to be in business, because the downfall has already started.
I did like how at one point when Gina and Haley are arguing about this investment money, Brandon jumps in and says he will invest his life savings. And Gina actually is kind of tempted to take the kid's money.
How much do you have in your piggy bank?
Yeah.
She says. Kelly gets in trouble for helping Alice make her bed. Dr. Rawlings lets Cece and Sophia see her. Kelly says she wants them to go before her group session is over because she doesn't want them to see how she is afterwards. They, of course, decide to stay and wait for the session to end. And when Kelly returns, she's a zombie who doesn't really even recognize them and doesn't respond to anything they say. So Sophia says she doesn't trust Rawlings, and Cece says, "I'm starting to think the same thing."
Yeah, and it's interesting how this scene unwinds because first Kelly's roommate comes back and she's in this dazed state, and so Sophia and Cece are looking at her in horror and, oh my goodness, this poor creature, you know, she's so sick.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kelly comes back in the same state.
Mm-hmm.
And they know Kelly wasn't like that before she left, so therefore there's a good chance that her roommate is not usually like this either. And I think they realize that whatever is happening to Kelly is not good.
It's interesting Rawlings isn't concerned that, you know, he knew they were going to stay. So maybe he's just got this God complex that he can just, you know, tell them, this is what Kelly needs, and they'll just buy it from him.
Yeah, I feel like he's feeling pretty invincible right now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's obviously been doing shenanigans for at least 13 years that we are aware of. And that is it for a Thursday episode. So we will be back after we watch episode 479. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Still walking around the remains of the Plaza of Nations at Expo 86. We're watching Santa Barbara.
I know that you saw Brandon without permission. And I know that you tried to get him involved in this ridiculous cookie scheme of yours.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 479 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Friday, June 13th, 1986. I would have still been working at the Math Assistance Center. And I remember one of our duties was to give exams to people who were entering college-level math courses but hadn't completed all the high school prerequisites. We had 3 different copies of it, so if someone failed the first one, they could study up and come in again and do the second one. And we had one guy who didn't know any math at all, who was just trying to get into, I don't know, some trades thing, I guess, where he needed math, but he failed all 3 with like 0, except, the last one he got 1, and we're like, how did you get 1 on that? And it was an algebraic thing, and he had just ignored all the X's and Y's and just added up all the numbers, and it just happened to come out to the right number, and he saw that number in one of the responses and just circled it. So we actually, the 3 of us came up with a 4th exam in case he came back. So that was one of the fun duties I had. Don't think that guy ever got in because even the simple stuff he didn't get. And I'm wondering if maybe some days, I don't remember all 3 of us being there all the time, so I'm wondering if we alternated. Or maybe some of us were helping my boss with his video thing, and we weren't in the center. So, well, try and remember how that went. In 1986, Danny is arrested. For drunk driving. He's hanging out with a lot poorer crowd of people than Ted. And I'm kind of sad he's not in the summertime fun time with Ted this year. He's got his own stud friends that he's hanging out with. The last time we saw Danny was 70 episodes ago, episode 409, which is like almost 3 months, I think, in Santa Barbara time. And sadly, this is the last time we'll see him until Thanksgiving, November, 115 episodes from now. So this, as we'll see, is not a story about Danny. He is being used as a pawn for another plot. Eden overhears Danny saying to Cruz, "I don't want to be the big hero of the Hispanic community. I wouldn't marry a girl just so she could keep her son." Cruz decides to keep him in jail overnight to teach him a lesson, but Santana gets Keith to get him released, and that is really the only reason they brought back Danny, to drive a further wedge between Santana and Cruz, because what could be more certain than the sibling love that Santana has for Danny. So good extra little wedge in their relationship. But
and it's interesting to me, though, that we saw this kind of behavior from Eden way back in the day when she was always trying to get Cruz to kind of do favors for her family when they got into trouble. So now we're seeing it from Santana as well.
It didn't even occur to me. Keith had a lot of things going on in this episode.
Sure
he was in almost every scene. Santana discusses his visitation rights with Gina, saying, "I didn't give permission for him to get involved in this ridiculous cookie scheme of yours." I don't know why they think it's ridiculous. I mean, she didn't taste the cookies, so she doesn't know how good they are, in which case she would have realized they were roses. And but really, it doesn't seem unreasonable. Gina says she'll lose Brandon when Cruz leaves her, but Santana says there is no such clause in the new agreement with Cece. She has Brandon outright. Not one to wait very long before coming up with a new scheme. Santana says to Gina that she plans to tell Brandon that she's her real mother and that Gina tried to kill Cece. And knowing that Santana is allergic to flour, she throws some in Santana's face, which causes her to start sneezing and also take out some allergy pills that she takes immediately. So this is the first time we've heard of Santana's allergy. And I guess it's widespread enough known that Gina knows about it. But she leaves her pills behind in her anger with Gina. And the next thing we know, Gina's on the phone with Angel saying, "Can I buy a crack? And can I get it in pill form?" The next thing we see is Gina at the Orient Express runs across Cruz and Eden. "Oh, Cruz, Santana left these pills at my place." I don't know if she said my place. Definitely she was in the locker chat. And hands the crack-tainted allergy pills to Cruz. So Gina's barely gone a week without starting 2 schemes that are both illicit: stolen cookie recipe and attempted drugging. So presumably she's hoping Santana will end up risking Brandon's life, by having him crawl on a roof, just like the time Gina was on drugs, or perhaps something worse. So.
Plus, she's got that video in her back pocket of Dylan basically taunting Kelly to kill him. So, really, she's got 3 schemes going.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting with this allergy that Santana has to flour. It makes me think that she won't maybe ever know that these are actually Rose's cookies, because if she's allergic to flour, will she ever taste them?
Oh, that's an interesting thought. I know Gina did say must make it hard to make tortillas. She also gets a chance while she's at the Orient Express to throw in that Cruz and Eden make a handsome couple. And on the way out, she runs into Keith with Santana and tells them that they make a lovely couple too. Then circles around once, comes back and says it to them again, just so that they heard it the first time. Mary and Mason are annoyed that Mark hasn't left town yet. And Mary tells Mason she's pregnant.
I feel like we're all a bit annoyed that he hasn't left town.
No, I guess the big worry is he'll overhear now that Mary's pregnant, because she was going to tell Mason once or twice earlier, but it was in the courtroom. And for some reason, Mark is hanging around in the courtroom watching this trial. So she was a couple of times she had to stop talking when she saw he was there. So I really feel that Mark is going to overhear this and he's not going to leave town.
Yeah, he's kind of circling around like a shark.
Mm-hmm. Kelly asks to see Nick, and it appears that Dr. Rawlings has agreed because Nick shows up. But Rawlings says, oh, you can't see her. Goes into all the reasons why he has the authority to ban everyone. But Kelly happens by with a nurse, and Rawlings, of course, shouts to immediately sequester Kelly. But, of course, she runs over to Nick because she recognizes him, but only as a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so Nick tries pushing her to remember more, and she does, but she immediately starts screaming, get him away from me, get him away from me. And Dr. Rawlings says, you see, that's exactly why you can never see her. You're bringing out all these memories, and it's much too soon. So, as evil as Dr. Rawlings looks to us, I mean, he does seem to have some positive, psychiatric experience. He seems to be right about this, hurting Kelly.
It was interesting, though, when he was talking to Nick, we really got a sense of the full level of God complex that he does have, because he basically says that he doesn't care if CC himself tries to push his way into see Kelly. No one's going to see her. So,
yeah.
So, whether his medical treatment has some good in it or not is almost beside the point when it comes, alongside his gigantic ego.
Mm-hmm. And there must be some extra level of extremism that, is what Pearl's brother experienced. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, that wouldn't be such a storyline. So there may be several things at play with Dr. Rawlings. And, of course, he just looks evil. So. Yeah. David continues to fend off Mason's accusations on the stand. But eventually snaps and punches Mason, and Mason goes flying down, and Keith does a cool little smirky smile and bends over and goes, don't wipe the blood off.
Yeah, it's kind of like there's a World Cup soccer tournament going on right now, and of course the big news is always that various players like to take a dive when someone comes closer to them to try and get a penalty kick or something like that. So yeah, that's a little bit what Mason's doing in this episode.
Yeah, he missed a Keith. Oh, I overplayed it a bit. There's not really that much blood. Then Keith makes a comment that even Klaus von Bülow didn't get to take a swipe at his prosecuting attorney. Nick arrives with copies of some papers he found illegally at Sheila's apartment. And Julia calls Sheila to the stand and gets her to admit that she's been secretly pressuring the stockholders to strip David of his power in their joint company. And she eventually breaks down sobbing and confesses that the whole thing has been a ploy to get David out of the company. She hates him so much for being with Madeline, and she doesn't love him at all. Which, of course, depresses Mason and Keith when they realize their whole case is now turned, and we see Mason back at the Capwell house later rewatching the recordings at the wicker table over and over again, trying to see where he went wrong. At the Orient Express, Julia waits for David, who's still in his hotel room, and Sheila Carlisle lets herself in with her key and says, we fooled every last one of them. Sheila kisses him and asks him to stay, but he says he has a meeting with his lawyer. So, I think you called it. This is exactly what happened in that movie. The
witness for the prosecution. Yeah.
The girl testified and purposely lied so that the guy would get acquitted.
Yes. In the movie, it's very similar scenario. Guy, overwhelming evidence that he's the murderer. His lover comes in, testifies against him, and then it becomes clear that her evidence is fake. She's brought back to the stand, admits it's fake, and everyone feels so much sympathy for the guy who was on trial that they acquit him, and because of double jeopardy, he will not face the threat of being tried again.
Now it sounds like she's willing to take the perjury charge for this, but since this last evidence that sort of led to it all being exposed was illegally gotten, she might even get off from that. Because the DA will be embarrassed at the whole thing. So maybe she will get off. But one thing, it seemed to me at the end that he doesn't know that David is sleeping with Julia. Because the way he was talking about Julia, just as his lawyer, I think that could be a source of trouble between them.
I think two things came up in this episode that could possibly point to David's fate. And one is the actual ending of the movie Murder or A Witness for the Prosecution, where the woman finds out that the guy who beat standing trial, who is acquitted, finds out that he's actually taken up with another woman. And she's so upset that she went through all this work to save him, and now he's taking off on her, that she actually murders him. So we could see perhaps that kind of fate for David, if we're following the script of that movie. Another possibility, they mentioned the Klaus von Bülow trial. And Klaus von Bülow, this was a huge trial in the 1980s. He was a sort of Eurotrash socialite who was accused of murdering his very wealthy wife. And during the time when they were preparing for the trial, he was the toast of the town. He was invited to all the parties and everything. And when the trial took place, he was actually acquitted under very sort of dubious circumstances. And after he was acquitted, no one wanted anything to do with him. And he was completely frozen out of society. And so I feel like even if David doesn't meet a violent end, that the Capwells will find a way to get retribution on him.
He's got East Coast and West Coast Capwells now that will be up for his blood. And the Wainwrights, because Julia is going to be upset with it. The other thing that I thought of is maybe there will be a turn, as Julia is really the main victim of this storyline, if you don't count Madeline. Will Julia figure it out in time to actually get him convicted? Will she put it all together, maybe as she's doing her closing arguments or something, and then actually do something proactively to make sure he gets convicted, rather than being the victim? Because obviously when she finds out, this is going to be another devastating romantic relationship for Julia. Although if he suddenly leaves town after the trial, it will still be devastating. And would he just say, "Ha, we got you," or would he say, "Oh, I have to go back east for work," and then just never call her again?
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting to see what the plan is for Sheila and David. Are they planning to stay in town? I mean, they'll have $10 million from Madeline. Maybe they're planning to just go to South America or something. But yeah, it explains why we thought this murder mystery was so weird with only one suspect. Because we thought it was a completely different type of story than it really was. So that's actually kind of fun. And that's it for week 98. Ooh, getting close to the centennial week. We'll be back after we watch Monday's episode for week 99 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
The next time you're on trial for murder, I'd advise you to use a little more discretion.
Boy, I wish I found you half as amusing as you think you are.
Second attempt. 476. We're back. No. Take two.